Let's bring on ESPN investigative reporter TJ Quinn. We could talk to you about the deep investigations that you do, and we'll get to some of that. But the real reason we're having you on is talk about Pedro Gomez and the legacy of Pedro and Pedro Palooza event. We've talked to you about him before. Talk to us about the idea of what you guys are all doing this year with Pedro Palooza.
Yeah, the foundation was something that Pedro's wife, Sandy, put together after he died. Anybody in this business, anybody who knows baseball particularly, knew Pedro. And, I think Keith Olbermann said, right after he died, that Pedro was everybody's best friend. He was, I mean, the relationships you had with him, he was one of my closest friends. And everybody was looking for something to do after his death. Like you can't just say goodbye to somebody like that who had such a presence in people's lives. And so we thought about what are the issues that he really cared about. And through the foundation, it's only been really 3 years of this work, but we set up scholarships with the University of Arizona, with Arizona State. We set up an internship in partnership with the Arizona Republic and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. Um, Kind of amazed at how quickly we were able to do that and raise some money. And it was centered around this annual event, Pedro Palooza, that just his name just lent itself to it. And we recognize, particularly, Sandy, recognized that you can't just drag this out forever. People lose interest, they lose momentum, a lot of things competing for people's charitable dollars and their time. And it's also a lot of work to put together events like this. And we thought, let's go out big. Let's do one last real event. And we've been able to make some goals. Those scholarships have been endowed, which is great. We've raised, we're going to be able to do those internships, fully paid summer internship. Um, we're going to be able to continue doing that for a while. Um, but it's also just one more way to get all these people together who loved that man. I mean, I miss him every day. I don't think I talked to anybody in my life as often as I spoke to him.
You mentioned the scholarships. To me, the important thing about the scholarship, it's about what he loves. It's not just a general scholarship, from my
Completely.
understanding. This is about carrying on the legacy that he had, which is reporting.
It was. I mean, the one is at Arizona State is with the Cronkite School, where he frequently spoke to students. The one at the University of Arizona is actually for baseball players, which was special because his son Rio, who was in the Red Sox system, pitched professionally and unbelievably in Taiwan this past season, was, played at the University of Arizona. Um, yeah, those are crucial to him. And that was a big part of this internship as well. It's for a bilingual young journalist because that was a big thing with Pedro when he would speak to students, which he did all the time. If you are bilingual, that is an incredible tool. You are able to bridge communities. You're able to tell stories in places other people can't. Embrace that. And so that's a big part of what we're trying to pass on.
It wasn't just his relationship with friends like you, it was his relationship with people he didn't know at all. I mean, Jeff and I met him 5, 6 years ago when we were covering spring training. We hadn't met him before, we hadn't interviewed him on the show before. We just kind of asked him, and all of a sudden he's coming on, and the next thing you know, he's kind of regularly talking to us about stuff. And so it was the way he treated the people who could really do nothing for him. Like, who were we? We had a radio show, and he was this guy who had reported these huge stories, and yet he gave us as much time as he did anybody else.
He uh, he absolutely did that, and to go through a public place with him was always incredible. The connection people would have, and even to be in a clubhouse. Look, there are some people in a major league clubhouse or some other sport locker room. You walk in as a journalist, and sometimes you're too friendly, which is not good, and sometimes you're too adversarial, which is too good, which is not good. And Pedro was able to draw that line where he could just always connect to you as a person. He would find something about you to connect with, but it didn't keep him from doing his job. One of the most amazing things I ever saw in my life, and I feel like we talked about this before, was he ripped Kurt Schilling the night before Game 7, 2001 in the World Series, saying this guy has been, a me first guy his whole career. He has been a terrible teammate, but here's his chance to redeem himself. It wasn't just gratuitously going after somebody. It was holding the most important player on that team accountable on that day in a way that was thoughtful and intelligent, and one of the bravest things I've ever seen, because the fan base did not want to hear that the day before they're about to win their first World Series. And I was with him, the night before he wrote that column, which was fantastic. Sandy, his wife, a good friend of ours, Steve Kevin, and I were on the phone with him, like, just, hey, if you feel like this is what you want to do it, but just understand, make sure you're really aware of what you're walking into here. And the next day, we get to the ballpark in Phoenix, and I say, "How you doing?" And he plays some of the voicemail messages people had left for him, which was the most racist, nasty stuff you've ever heard. And what does he say? "I need to go down there to the field, don't I?" And which, yeah, he knew the answer to his own question. He knew he had to be accountable. And we knew walking through that stadium, anybody could take a shot at him. Anybody could say something, throw a punch, throw a beer, whatever. I mean, I've seen fans do some pretty nasty things. We get down to the field and we just walked around in foul territory, just so if anybody had something to say, he was there to hear it. And what happens? Greg Swindell was pitching with the Diamondbacks at the time, is walking off the field, sees Pedro, changes direction, walks over, shakes his hand, gives this huge nod, and then walks away back into the dugout. And it was the sign that the guys in the clubhouse knew what he was about, that he was speaking up for the guys who were furious with Schilling. There was such perfect Pedro to me that it was, yeah, he wanted you to like him. He was not someone who had thick skin. He wasn't somebody who, some people just are fearless. He wasn't. He wrote it because it was his job and he knew it was the right thing to do, and did it in the right way and made himself accountable. And the players knew that and respected it. And, it's just, there are very few people like him.
But isn't that what made him special? Isn't that what makes most good sports journalists special, is the ability to connect with the athletes that you have to cover, but also know that there is a line that you can't cross. I mean, we've heard the story
Yeah.
that you just mentioned, but even covering Barry Bonds, he went through a struggle doing that.
He got hammered for it. I was with him places, we'd be on the field in San Francisco because I was following all that too. And I mean, we were friends since 1996 when he was covering the A's and I was covering the White Sox. And you just kind of recognized, wow, I like this guy. And anytime we were together, we were hanging out, and I heard the stuff people yelled at him. I heard the stuff Barry yelled at him. I was with him start of spring training. What was it, 2007 maybe, or probably earlier? I don't know. But when Barry walked in and has to do this huge press conference, and the first thing he does is look at Pedro and says, "You still lying, Gomez?" In front of everybody, and Pedro's got to stand there and take it. But it was also never personal with Pedro. It wasn't, "I'm going to get this guy." He was offended by the idea that a player was doping, and I think he really felt that personally. But he could, that was a thing that got me. And I think that's what you were just talking about, was but he always remembered he was a human being, you were a human being, and that you could do your job and not forget that.
How do you handle that? You personally, how did Pedro handle it? How does a journalist handle a, an athlete yelling at them, an athlete coming after them? The reason I ask is we're now dealing in Philadelphia with a reporter who maybe crossed a line in what he wrote about Joel Embiid, but Joel Embiid then crossed a line by going after him and laying his hands on him. How, as a sports journalist, do you deal with those situations and not make yourself part of the story?
Oh man, it's a constant, struggle, reevaluation, whatever. It's funny when I got to ESPN, one of my bosses, Dwayne Bray, had just finished being interviewed by some publication. He said, "Let me ask you something. You've been interviewed before, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Has anyone ever quoted you accurately?" I said, "Not yet." And he said, "Yeah, me either." And that we talked about how every journalist should go through that, what it's like to be on the other side, that you have to remember with the stories that we write about, particularly, the stuff I do is investigative, right? No one ever likes hearing from me, frankly. I'm not the one who calls for the good news. So, I
Should we
try
keep
to,
that in mind if you call us out of the blue?
Something.
I was, no, that'll only be for good
Oh
reason.
crap, TJ's calling.
I was on, it was funny. I got pulled into, division series, coverage just as a sideline guy, like in 2008 or nine or whatever. And I was doing, it was, Orioles Tigers, and I'm there again just to be the sideline guy. And Dan Duquette was the GM of the Orioles at the time and sees me, and he walked up and said, "Is there anything I need to know?" And I said, "No, no, no, it's all good. I'm just doing baseball. There's no."
He saw you and he was a little worried that you
He
were.
was like, he's like, "Oh God, what happened?" I mean, I really do try to remember, like, one, it's not personal. I don't go after people to get them. You go after a story and you try to tell it accurately, and you try to think about what it would be like to be on the other side of that, and how would I want to be treated. And not everybody does that. Some people are too deferential, and some people are too, I think, I would say, insensitive. Even jerks have rights. Even people who do things wrong, you don't have to demonize them. And I've had people say to me years later that they felt like, they may not have liked what I reported, but they never took it personally. Some do, some don't, but you just be honest. Don't try to fool anybody. Don't try to trick anybody. Do your job. Be obvious about what you're doing, or transparent about what you're doing. Um, Look, it's tough. I mean, like you mentioned, if a guy like Joel Embiid gets mad at you, there's not a whole lot you can do, right? I mean, the closest I ever came to any kind of scrape with somebody, in a clubhouse, was with a shortstop, and even that was like, oh man, I don't know how well I'm going to survive this. Nothing happened, but it's like, this is the smallest guy on the team, and he's still a professional athlete. You are vulnerable in that sense, and there's never any reason to put your hands on somebody, and that's absolutely wrong. And it's kind of a risk that you take, but you gotta, if you're going to do this job the right way, if you're going to report, you better be accountable. You better be out there, and you better be able to go to those people. Some of them get it, some of them don't. One of the best I ever had when I covered Tony Phillips with the White Sox, was one of my favorite guys I ever covered. He got in a fight with a fan in Milwaukee. Um, Part of my job at the time was writing a column about it. I ripped him, and I went up to him in the clubhouse and I said, "Hey, look, I don't know if you'll see this or not, but I wrote it. I ripped you. If you have anything to say, I'll be here." And he said, "Kid, I got it coming. Give it to me." And it was a great lesson for me, like, be straightforward. But that also happened with a certain Mets player where I was critical. And then same thing. I told him, when I was covering that team, I said, "Look, this is the point I made. I don't know if you're going to see it, but I don't want to hide from you." And he said, "Wow, that's really stand up. I have respect for that." And then he screwed me for the next 18 months, every chance he could get. Um, Finally I was like, "Dude, enough." And he's like, "All right, okay."
I'm curious though, how far do you go in reporting? I mean, you tackle, especially as an investigative reporter, some really difficult and challenging issues. I've seen you mention in other interviews a book about by Robert Caro on writing, where it looks at the process of it. I'm sure you never feel like you have enough, but how far do you go in terms of interviewing people and pushing to get that story and choosing what you include and don't? Because part of the Embiid situation is Jeff and I kind of feel like the reporter could have written the story without the part that inflamed Embiid with his family in there. So how do you make those decisions as a reporter?
Well, even that reporter said he felt like, after the feedback that he got on, I assume it was social media and however else people reached out, that, expressed some regret from what I saw. Um, Look, it helps to have editors and people to talk through it with, and, because you may have an idea that this doesn't seem personal, or it's well in bounds, and somebody may point out, well, not really. That's part of it. I mean, you bring up Robert Caro, who I think is, the absolute gold standard as a journalist and as an historian. I mean, the guy's written 4 books, yeah, 5 books, so far, and we're all waiting for the fifth. And they are four volumes on the life of Lyndon Johnson. The first volume was published in 1981, and we're still waiting for the last one. I can't do what Robert Caro does, where I take Lyndon Johnson's brother and I take him to the family home, which is a national landmark, and sit him down at the family dinner table at dinner time, and then sit behind him to get him to describe what he's seeing, and have him suddenly break down decades of myths about who Lyndon Johnson was and what his upbringing was, right? I don't have the time or the resources, and maybe I don't even have I don't know, the guts to do that, the depth of the kind of reporting that he does. But you never feel like you're finished. It's funny, like when you say investigative journalism, or you describe yourself as an investigative reporter, people, even in the business, sometimes think it's like there's this sort of mystical side to what we do. There's something, it's like this, like somehow we're national intelligence, we've got this secret training or whatever. Mostly what we have is more time, just to really, really dig on something. Every story, you just, have you answered every question? And you never get totally to the end of it. But like, the largest, the most recent really big project I worked on was a breakdown of the 10 months that Brittany Griner spent in a jail in Russia. And when we started out, we thought, this is going to be maybe 4,000 or 5,000 word piece, which is a very long piece. And we'll talk to the State Department and the White House and people around her. But then you kept thinking, well, all right, who else is out there that we can talk to? And what about the guy they traded her for, Victor Boot, the merchant, so-called merchant of death? What if there's a way to get him? And we reached out and we got him. I mean, it was all of a sudden I'm on a Zoom call with him from Moscow, and we spent 5 hours on the phone with that guy. And not at one time, but over the course, we did an 80-something minute Zoom call that we recorded and did a piece out of, but all together, like the question, and I'm thinking of Robert Caro every time I'm reaching out to him, and he was willing to let me keep asking, what did your jail cell look like? What color was the paint? Where did the light come from? Where did the light come from the window? What sound did the guards' shoes make when they came down the hall? Did their keys rattle? Paint this picture for me. There's always something more. And then we thought, what about the judge who sentenced him to prison in the United States? We reached out to her. She got back to us. And all these people, just kept, if you decide at the beginning, this person's not likely to talk to us, we're not likely to get this information, you're never going to get it. And I could have gone on another 2 years probably trying to tell more and more of that story. But at some point, it's like there's only so much information you can get. We got things we never expected. We got access to people from the White House and the State Department that we never expected. We got access to people in Russia we never expected. You just kind of keep pulling on all those threads. And at some point, it's always a judgment call. Is this enough to go with? Have I told a complete story? And
so how do you know when to stop pulling the thread? I mean, the work that you did on the Brittany Griner story was so important. And getting it out is important, but at the same time, as you said, you're getting to talk to Victor Boot, and you're getting to talk to judges, things you don't think that you're going to be able to accomplish as part of a story. And as you peel that onion, when do you say, look, I still have left pieces of the onion, but I have to stop here. This is where I have to tell the story.
well, part of it, sometimes an editor makes that decision for you and just says enough already, And in this case, what I thought was going to be a 4,000 or 5,000 word piece ended up a 20,000 word piece. But it's half a book. It's the longest thing I've ever written. And maybe it was too long. I don't know. But it really is just sort of a judgment thing. Have I told a complete story? I like this. The thing I preach all the time is that I really think journalism should be treated as science. That you can go into it with an hypothesis, but do everything you can to disprove it. Don't go in with an idea, this is what I think the story is, and then confirmation bias is just going to let you, support that hypothesis, and you're going to be bringing in information for a preconceived notion. You have to be willing to break down every conception you have about a story. And one of those in this case would have been, who is Victor Boot, right? Another one was about her treatment in prison. There is no good experience in a Russian prison, right? but there were all these concerns that people had about what is her treatment going to be? One, as an American; two, as a Black American; three, as a gay Black American; four, as a gay Black American woman. Um, and so yeah, we had to ask what was the reality of that. And the fact was, it could have been a hell of a lot worse than it was. Um, and sometimes that doesn't, people may not want to read that because it may sound like you're almost excusing it or sounding like it's not as bad as it was. No, not saying that at all. I'm just saying you got to tell an accurate picture. And did we do everything we could to paint a picture of what her life was like in there day to day, without access to her, by the way, because she, she published her own memoir. She fortunately, through people, didn't tell anybody not to talk to me, which was great. And I was able to finally meet her back in May. And
What was
um,
that like to
to meet
finally
her,
yeah, to get to meet her after telling her story and trying to fight for her?
that was really something. It was funny. She came over to, I don't know. I mean, she would have no reason to know who I was, right? It's because she doesn't know what's being published in the US. What's funny is Victor Boot knew who I was because we get on this first phone call and I said, I'm surprised you wanted to do this. And he said, well, your coverage was fair. I said, you were able to follow it? He said, all we watch in prison is ESPN. So he's seeing every report I'm doing on SportsCenter and NBA Today. Brittany has no idea who I am. She's just been told this is a guy who is covering you for ESPN and probably, did more of it than other people. So she came, she's got to bend down 2 feet to hug me, which is, you don't typically hug sources, but she was, she just came right over. And it was really funny because it's this totally one-sided kind of thing where, look, I did my job. I was never someone who's like, we are BG. No, that's not my job. I may have personal feelings where I think she should be out of there, but my job is to report. I'm not an advocate. There are other people to do that. I've got to be clear-headed about my job and do that all the time. But that doesn't mean that I wasn't invested in her story. And it doesn't mean that when I met her, I was a little emotional, like, wow, here's this person that, I know all this stuff about, and she knows like nothing about me. But she was, could not have been nicer, could not. I mean, there's something fascinating about her. Anybody who's been around her, she is captivating. There's just something about her personality that just really, you get drawn in. And even prison guards, over there. There was this great story. I talked to one of her teammates over there, Zhenya Belyakova, who went to visit her when she was in jail in Moscow. And she walks in. They said, "Who are you here to visit?" And she said, "Brittany Griner." And the guards say, "Oh, you're here to see our girl." And she's like, "Your girl? She's my girl. What are you talking about?" Um, so it was kind of cool to see that in person. The only interaction I'd ever had with her before, when I think she was about to graduate from Baylor and was at ESPN, she bumped into me at the Starbucks line, apologized. I said, "That's cool," and that was the extent of our relationship.
Before we let you go, I wanted to ask about you've written about this year a lot about gambling in sports also, whether it was the Shohei stories
Oh, that, yeah.
or the other stories with David Fletcher and the Angels out there. So you've seen some of the impact of gambling on sports. Jeff and I have talked a lot about it on the show. It's not something that's just relegated to baseball or even professional sports, as we see a lot of college sports having these issues. As somebody who's watched it up close with some of these stories, can you talk about the threats you see to the sports and the integrity of those games?
The threats are enormous, and we're only barely starting to see them. I mean, with Otani, I mean, it was because the person involved was so outsized and the story was so weird. I mean, at first, everyone's reaction is, how could he not know? How is Otani not the one actually betting? I think
That,
that's
that
it.
was our reaction. How do you
Yeah,
not
that was, and,
watch
and I
a
think the same
account?
with ours. And that's why, and thank God it's like, it's why you don't go into it with this idea that he must have been betting the whole time. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. Let's find out what we can. And at the end, the story made sense, the way it did. But there are going to be players, there are certainly players who have done that. And from what I know about the nature of gambling, before it was legalized the way it was in the US, it's the lower levels that are really vulnerable. It's, in tennis, you saw that with, lower ranked players, these matches nobody's keeping an eye on. But all of a sudden, these betting markets all over, the world, typically in Asia, you have that with lower division soccer teams, where people are making these bets in foreign markets on sports in other countries that are below the radar. They're not looking at Manchester United or Chelsea, any team like that. It's these lower division things, and they can start to clean up. And it's the same vulnerability here. And I've also seen, my son played junior college baseball for 2 years and was talking about teammates he had who all of a sudden were completely over their heads with legal gambling. These are junior college students. We don't know how to deal with it, frankly. This is going to be, we could have multiple people do nothing but this for years to come.
We really appreciate your time, but before we let you go, we want to just one more time, just have you talk about Pedro Palooza, how
Oh,
people can get involved, and just your last thoughts on Pedro.
yeah, oh man, and I really appreciate your asking about it. So the event, which is open to the public, this is if you're in Phoenix, you want to go to Phoenix. It's just going to be a week from Friday, the 14th and 15th. There's a gala, Pedro Palooza, at a terrific local club, the Deuce, and then the next day there's a golf event that actually is even more popular than that. We've got this huge auction, some amazing events. Speaking of golf, because it's a big golf crowd, you can bid on a round of golf at Wingfoot for 3 people with dinner and drinks. Most people
Jeff,
don't
you're gonna
get
bet
that.
on that for me, right?
That's
Of course,
it's a pretty
I'm
good
not
one.
taking you, but I'll bet
I
on
was
it.
gonna say you're gonna bid. You're just not gonna bring me. I see how it is.
Get him a cocktail napkin or something.
That's right. I'll give him a golf ball.
Yeah. Get it
Come on,
right.
DJ. I thought you're on my side here.
I'm on no one's
You're a
side.
reporter. You take no side. I understand that.
Exactly. But it's not personal. That's the whole
No,
that's
it's
the whole
not
point of
personal.
it. But we're gonna have, it's anyone in the public can bid on these. You can go to just look up Pedro Gomez Foundation. That's the organization has a website. Uh, we're putting those items all up there. There are terrific sports packages, tons of memorabilia. Um, so, you can come and have fun, but you can also participate by bidding on those items, which are, again, fantastic, by just making direct donations. Um, and I just, for all of us, it's a way to hang on to this dear friend, the kind who, when his son, his son Rio was drafted and was playing rookie ball, and he came to town with the Lowell Spinners to play the Brooklyn Cyclones, and Pedro flew in, and I picked him up at the airport. Came to my house, and he grabs my son, who's 13 at the time, and says, "Mikey, let's go. Grab a bat, grab the tee. We're going to the backyard to look at your swing." And you know, when when he died, all 3 of my kids just absolutely devastated, because he didn't just get involved in your life; he was involved in everybody in your life. And if we get another chance to celebrate that and what he brought, God, that's worth everything.
Well, whether there's Pedro Palooza or not, we will always take the chance to talk Pedro Gomez with you. We appreciate you giving some other thoughts while you're with us. And thanks for always giving us a little time to talk through everything. We'll make sure to put out the website link to the Pedro Gomez Foundation so that people can look if they want to bid on things or sign up. And I wish you the best of luck with it.
And thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.